So I'm here today. I'm Manon Fraser, and I'm with the New Ulm League of Women Voters. I have the privilege today to be here with June Howe, who is the chef at Turner Hall here in New Ulm, and was the chef and menu designer of the Healing and Reconciliation Ride here in New Ulm in December. So that's kind of where I want to focus our conversation today. Now, you told me what food you picked and why. Can you kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was sort of interesting, actually. I was out of town, and then I came back, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're doing the Dakota Riders next week," and I was like, "Oh, wild. Okay, well, let's put together a menu." And I have done some work with Sean Sherman from the Sioux Chef, and I spent some time cooking out at Standing Rock during the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, and I have a good sense of cooking just from being in restaurants. And so the goal with the menu was to cook food that uses exclusively indigenous ingredients. So no pork, no beef, no chicken, no dairy, no flour, no wheat, because all of those things weren't here prior to colonization. And so looking at that, serving some traditional dishes. So we did a Three Sisters soup that had beans and squash and rice, and was made with bison broth. So we got the bones and boiled those off and made our own stock. And then we served turkey tacos in place of chicken, seasoned with some ancho and chipotle peppers, which are native to South America. And then it had nopales, which is a pickled nopale, which is a cactus, right? Because that's native to the Southwest. And they were in corn tortillas because flour wasn't here. And then the second day, we did a bison brisket that I smoked for 14 hours, and then served that with wild rice, squash, beans. I think there were some onions in there, and then we also served that with wajapi, which is like a traditional native berry sauce. But so also like no added sugar. It was just about kind of serving a more traditional style meal. But also still informed by like today, you know. I mean, it's like I think native people weren't here eating tacos the same way we are today. So taking some inspiration from what's been going on today and sort of funneling that through an indigenous lens with indigenous ingredients.
Yes, and your corn tacos were blue.
Yep, yeah, blue corn, yep.
I had the privilege of being there and working with you on that first night and had your Three Sisters soup, which was absolutely delicious.
Thank you.
I think you should put it on the menu. So how long have you been cooking?
Yeah, so I'm 32, and I got my first restaurant job when I was 16 as a dishwasher, and I probably was cooking at home at that point. I mean, my mom cooked pretty good for us growing up, but also when I was younger, I liked cooking for myself. But I didn't really care much for cooking as a profession or as a whole thing. I mean, you don't get paid very well, it's long hours, and it's really tiring. But when I was about 22 or 23, I started doing some, or maybe I was 24, I forget how old I was, but I was working at a bar, and I wasn't really thrilled with the work I was doing, and I ended up going out to the Dakota Access Pipeline protests and cooking out there in the teepees, and that felt like the first time where I was like, oh, I'm cooking food for a community and helping sustain an effort that I think is important, and that was sort of shifted my lens. And then I came back to Mankato, and I was living there, and I was dating somebody up in the cities, and we went out to eat at my favorite ramen shop, and they had a now hiring sign, and I was like, well, I'm already up here to see you. Why don't I just pick up a shift here? You know, I wasn't planning on doing anything full time, and I applied. I did 2 shifts, and I quit my job in Mankato and went full time into the cities, and just kind of figured out a weird commuting and sleeping at friends' houses schedule. And I did that for about 2 or 3 years, and then the pandemic hit, and I got laid off with everyone at the place that I was working at. So for about 2 years, I did some odd jobs in construction work, and then I got back to cooking in 2022. So I guess 16 to 32, 16 years minus the 2 I took off during COVID, so 14 years.
Yeah. Well, we all took those 2 years off.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, and you said once you work for a sushi. I can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I worked at a ramen shop cooking, and then I also worked at a sushi joint serving, and I did some prep work there as well. So
Excellent. So do you see yourself maybe doing any more indigenous meals or?
yeah, I think that like the way that I apply my knowledge of indigenous cuisine is using that lens as opposed to maybe like actually the food. Like I think the process feels very indigenous as opposed to the end product. So most of my food that I like to cook, I go to the farmer's market and I see what's in season, and I pick out what looks good, and I buy from the farmers who I've never purchased from a farm where I haven't been to the farm myself, and I purchase from farmers that I think have good sustainable practices in the way that they're raising their animals, in the way that they're growing their food, and engaging in proper crop rotation and not monocropping, so that I think that creates a better product for the consumer, but also for the environment. And so I think through that lens, even if the end product is something that doesn't feel native, I think that is how a lot of indigenous chefs are working right now, is asking what's available, because that's how we would have cooked prior to colonization. Post-colonization, there is some good in the globalization of markets, right? We've been exposed to so much more. I don't know if I would have ever tried kimchi if it weren't for globalization, but
True.
In that same token, we have so moved to purchasing things at the grocery store that are getting shipped from Mexico or California or even farther away than that.
Pre-made.
Correct. And so I think for me, like the way that I view my relationship to indigenous cooking and indigenous food is by saying like, what's available to me?
Yes.
And then what can I create out of what's available to me?
Something that crossed my mind after you and I met for coffee one day was our farmers market that we have here in New Ulm, on a Saturday morning especially. Would you, I know Saturday is a very busy day for you in the restaurant area. Give any thought to maybe bringing a hot plate down and just cooking something and showing people what they can do
Yeah, I've thought
with the food that's offered there?
Yeah, I think I've thought about. So I'm working on opening up a food truck in the spring. I don't want to get too into it, but I think that my goal will always be to highlight and say, if anyone ever asks me, how did you make this, I'll literally give someone a recipe. I don't care.
Yeah.
It might not be set up to single family size. It might be restaurant portions, but just scale it back. And anytime, and a lot of the time it's just technique. You know, people ask me, oh, how did you make this? And I go, well, the marinade has onion and soy sauce and ginger and garlic and some Korean pear, and then you blend it up and pour it over some steak and sear it off with a little bit of oil, you know, something like that. So I think, you know, with such a dedication to local food, as people see it, I'll be like, well, this meat's from here, this vegetable's from here, this bread I bought from this baker, you know, and then it sort of helps people. I would hope it helps inspire people. Every time I go places that do that, it inspires me. So I would also have no problem like teaching a class, but that's just not really ever been something that I've been offered. But I wouldn't be opposed. But I think that. I think it also has to do with shifting people's perspectives. I think when a lot of people go out to eat, there are certain things that undeniably are easier to just purchase than they are to make at home. I think anything that's deep fried, frying stuff at home is a huge pain in my opinion.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of it. But oftentimes I find, you know, no shade if you want to go out and buy yourself a burger or a salad or something, but those things are pretty easy to make at home. And I don't necessarily think it's for lack of ability 100%, but I do think that sometimes just being shown how easy it can be can help.
I have noticed with having 2 adult grandchildren that one, they don't cook or they cook very little, and they're not sure what some vegetables should be used for. They're, you know, like broccoli rabe and some of those things. They don't know what they are.
Yeah, I think that like we shifted at some point. You know, I'm 32, and I at some point we shifted as a larger society away from technical cooking and shifted into ingredient based and recipe based cooking, which isn't bad. Having a recipe is a good thing. It can help you recreate a dish, ideally exactly how the person who made it for you created it. But it takes away when we're just looking at those things and we're not getting taught technique and why things work, that becomes difficult for people to understand. A good example is, when I was like 24 or 25, I was making coleslaw with somebody, and we had mayonnaise, we had cabbage, we had sugar, but we didn't have any white wine vinegar, distilled white vinegar, which is what the recipe called for. And this young cook comes up to me and goes, "Hey, we're out of distilled white vinegar." And I go, "That's fine, just use apple cider." And they were like, "What?" And I was like, "Just use apple cider vinegar." And they were like, "Well, that tastes fine." I was like, "It'll taste a little different, but like largely it's the same." And if we were out of that, then I might have said, "Why don't we just try it with a little bit of lemon juice or something, or lime juice?" And so knowing that, like, oh, I'm out of this acid, I can swap it out for this, or knowing this dish works because this is a really fatty, tough roast. So maybe I don't have access to pork butt, but I have chuck roast. That could create something good.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a really big failure of recipes is that they oftentimes, partially because people don't read, but also read the description of the recipe because people just want to get to the thing, but also partially because I think sometimes people just don't know, even if they make a good recipe, they don't know why it works. They just eat it and they're like, well, that's good. And then I go, well, the reason that you put the lime juice in like a mojo marinade for pork butt is because it helps break down the fat and it helps tenderize the meat. So I think as people are cooking, they should be asking, why am I putting these ingredients in here and what is it doing?
I think too, doing basically all recipe-based cooking, you lose some of your creativity.
Yep.
Because you don't think, my sister and I are wonderful at ignoring most of the recipe and just doing our own thing. But I've cooked for a good many years. My grandchildren aren't, going to do that. Plus, they don't have the facilities to do it.
Yeah. And I think some of it is about education. I think in some capacity, like I don't know how much, my mom taught me a little bit growing up, but it really was just like, life is so busy these days. Everything moves so fast. You don't have a lot of time to slow down and teach kids how to do things. And I had a bit of a laugh about it because, my family gets together for the major holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, those things. And all growing up, my uncle was the one he'd do the roast and then it would come out and he would carve it. And now he's getting a little bit older and he doesn't want to carve it anymore. So I go over there and he had his two sons. He goes, well, you guys are going to carve it. And they gave him this look like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. You've never shown me how to do this. And I thought there is that lost opportunity where if he had just been, even if he was doing it for the last 15 years, if he just said, hey, you're going to come over here and learn how to do this.
Yeah.
But I just think there is a certain element of caregiving where you don't want to inconvenience your guest, aka your kids, for the holidays, but also at the same time, you really owe it to them. It's a gift. I think, like, even though we view it as like, oh, I'm putting my kid to work or I'm putting my guest to work, it's a gift and it's an exchange of knowledge and an exchange of tradition and culture that can get passed down. So ironically, they both kind of gave him this blank look, and I was like, well, I can break it down. At that point, I'd never broken down a turkey, but I'd broken down hundreds of ducks and chickens and stuff, and it's all just a bird, So
it's all typically pretty much the same stuff.
Exactly.
In that same vein, it has taken me years to successfully cut up a chicken.
Okay, yeah.
Because I always bought chicken parts.
Yep.
Which are so much more expensive than just buying a whole chicken.
Yeah.
I think sometimes with the loss of some of these techniques, we are spending way more money than we really need to, buying canned beans instead of the dried beans.
Yep.
Those kind of things are.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's less about even still, your example of beans, like canned beans are quicker in theory, but they're not that much quicker. Dry beans require a little bit of planning. You need to think, what am I going to have for dinner tomorrow? And then you just throw some beans in water before you go to bed. It really doesn't take much.
No.
So I agree with you. I think that people could be saving a lot of money and doing themselves a lot of good and learning a lot if they just applied themselves.
Well, and the food is so much better.
Yeah.
I think. Well, better tasting and better for you. If, like you say, the farmer's market, the carrots right out of the ground.
Yeah, and I think I was talking to somebody about this where I said, I'm pretty stubborn. I was telling them that if even if it didn't taste better, if it was just better for my community and better for the environment, I would still probably go to the farmer's market if it tasted a little bit not as good. But the blessing is that it tastes so much better,
Yes.
and that it's so much better for me, and there's just no reason not to, other than that you don't have enough time sometimes, and that sometimes those things are a little bit more expensive, potentially, but also sometimes they're a little bit cheaper. I mean, I worked at a restaurant where we cut our food cost down. We started purchasing mainly from local farmers, and our food cost went down 6%.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're intelligent about what you're looking for and you're buying things in season, and you're being strategic about when you're buying, I mean, in the middle of at the beginning of tomato season, you're not going to get a great deal on tomatoes.
No.
But as it's waning down and farmers have crates full of tomatoes they haven't moved, they practically give them to you.
Yes.
I mean, I would get cases and cases of these tomatoes, and then we'd make marinara sauce and jar them and can them, and then we'd serve it in the restaurant, and it's just as fresh as when we got it from them.
The one thing that I walked away from Turner from that night was when I walked in, I could smell something wonderful on the stove. Not only what food you were serving that night. And I said to you, because it was a bigger pot than I could see into, you were actually boiling the carcass of the turkey. And at your age, I found that fascinating, that you would make broth. And your Three Sisters broth, I could have just drank it.
Yeah, it's
It
good.
was delicious.
Yeah, it was bison, but yeah, I mean, to me, that's also another example of things where I think part of being strategic in cooking is my mom is a firm believer in the crock pot. I mean, just throw everything in and walk away and come back 10 hours later and it's delicious. And so I always say, like, anything you can automate is great. And broth is the classic automation. You just throw it on the range, and even if the water gets low, you just put more water in and just extract all that flavor. And then even if you don't have a ton of room to store it, you just reduce it down, and you can probably turn 5 gallons into a single quart of really intensified stock.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about it going bad, you could split it up into smaller Tupperware and put it in the freezer. And then when you want to use it, add it to your food and add some water to rehydrate it.
Yes. Tell me where a lot of your, like you said, bison, where did you purchase that?
Sure. So normally I purchase bison from Sleepy Bison Acres, which is in Hanska, Minnesota. I've been buying from them for, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 years now. But fortunately, I got the bones from them, but they were out of brisket and roast because they are doing so well for themselves, which is great.
Good.
But I ended
Absolutely.
up getting the bison from the Cheyenne River Sioux in South Dakota. So I called them up and then they shipped it over. So even still, I mean, I try to push people, if you can't find something locally and you really need it, try to look to your neighbors. I mean, South Dakota, it is an 8-hour drive, but that's still so much better than purchasing something that was, maybe grown in California or Mexico
Yes.
or, Florida or something on the other end of the country. I mean, there's so much indirect cost that people don't consider: gas, the water, like all of those things play into driving up the price of things. I mean, the price of eggs right now is getting so high, and yet I can go to Owatonna and I can get eggs cheaper from my farmer there than I can anywhere
Yes.
else.
Farm eggs are always, I think, a better product.
Yeah.
But I just I grew up on a farm,
Yeah.
so I'm pretty much a thing. To finish this off, since we've gone a little over our 15 minutes,
Sure.
as usual, what would you say was the best part for you after doing all of this menu planning and cooking for the reconciliation ride?
I think the best part was just creating something that could assist. I think at the end of the day, cooking, restaurants, food, all of that thing, all of those things fall underneath the kind of larger umbrella of hospitality. And something that somebody once said to me was like, the word hospitality has the same root as the word hospital, because at a hospital, they take care of you. Well, when you're engaging in hospitality work, you are taking care of people. It's not the same one-to-one,
No.
obviously, but it is about taking care of people and making them feel like they're taken care of. And I think that just being able to do that and having the riders and everyone there feel like they were being taken care of is just rewarding for me.
I know I heard quite a few of them say that they were so impressed with New Ulm
Yes.
and the care that you took to make sure that what they had was something that was familiar to them.
Yeah.
And to some of them, the couple of the ones I talked to, they were 12.
Yeah.
And we're doing this ride. So, well, I really appreciate you coming here, and and I'm looking forward to some of your other specials. I've had some of them from Turner.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to if and when you open your food truck.
Awesome. Thank
So,
you.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah,
Jill.
thanks for having me.
Yep.
Yep.
Bye now.
Yeah, bye.